I woke on cold stone with a hot pot in my arms and a dead wolf lying at my feet. And the pot said, in a voice like a lid settling into place, "Cook him properly, or he will keep hunting." I had been dead a moment before. I knew it the way you know a room is empty before you turn on the light, and the knowing did not frighten me nearly as much as the word him. My name was Bram. I had been a cook for most of a life that was over now. First a small kitchen in a cold city, and then a room where anyone could eat for free on the last evening of the month. And I had done both for 7 years without being able to taste a single thing I made. The illness took my tongue first, and the rest of me later. I had learned to cook by weight and by clock, and by the faces of the people who ate, and to trust those faces more than I trusted myself, because they were the only instrument I had left. I died at my own stove on a Tuesday, in the middle of service, and my last thought was that somebody needed to turn off the burner. Somebody had. I was on my back on a floor of gray stone that was faintly warm, like a slab that has stood all day in the sun, except there was no sun. The light came out of the stone itself in long, dull veins, the color of old honey. My hands were in front of my face before I decided to lift them, and they were wrong. They were my hands, the same square nails, the same crooked finger from the winter I fell on the stairs, but the burns were gone. A cook's hands with no history in them. It bothered me more than waking up did. The wolf at my feet was the size of a large dog and gray as a wet road. Something had opened its throat, and it had not been me. Its eyes were open, and there was no cruelty in them, only the flat surprise of something that had been running a minute ago. The pot in my arms was iron, squat, with 3 stubby legs and a lid that lifted at one edge like an eyelid. 2 small hands, no bigger than a child's, hung off the rim where handles ought to be. It was hot, and it did not burn me. When it spoke, the lid rose and fell, and the sound came out of its belly. "You are the cook," it said. "I am the pot. Cook him properly." "I have been dead," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. It always did. In a kitchen, you can be terrified and still call the order. "Yes," said the pot. "So has he. His is fresher." I sat up. There was no door and no stair, only a low arch on one side and blackness beyond it. Along the wall, in the cracks where the stone had split, pale roots grew in bunches, fat and blunt as fingers, and higher up there was a crust of gray salt where the damp had climbed and dried 1,000 times. "What happens if I do not cook him?" I said. "Then he keeps hunting," the pot said. "He is in the meat. Everything down here dies hungry, and the hunger stays in the flesh, and whoever eats it raw takes the hunger with the strength. Cooking takes the hunger out and leaves the rest. That is all cooking has ever been. You knew that before you knew anything else." "I did not know that," I said. "You did," the pot said. "You just said it about stock. There is a state a person can be in where the enormous thing is too big to hold, so the hands take over and do the small thing instead. My hands took over. There was a knife lying beside the wolf, a short, broad blade with a plain wooden handle, and later I understood it had come from the pot. "Fire," I said. The pot lifted its lid, and there was a coal inside it, one coal the size of my thumb, burning low and orange and steady. It had, I would learn, been burning for 11 years. I built a nest of the dry rootstocks that had fallen from the cracks, and I fed it, and the coal did the rest without being asked. I broke the wolf down on the warm stone, shoulder, leg, loin, the long strap of the neck. What I noticed was the muscle. It was denser than any wild animal I ever handled, the grain very fine, and when I pressed my thumb into the meat, it pressed back. Under the ribs, the heart was black red and larger than it should have been, and I set it aside because something told me that was not a first day's work. I pulled the roots and scrubbed them against my sleeve, scraped salt off the wall with the flat of the blade, and filled the pot at the seam where the water came out. Then I did what I would have done in any kitchen on any night. I browned the neck and the shoulder over the coal on a flat piece of stone, because color is flavor even if you cannot taste flavor, and then put it in the water cold and brought it up slow and skimmed the gray scum off with the edge of the knife, and put the roots in when the meat had been going 40 minutes by the count in my head, and salted it in 3 stages and let it be. The pot was very quiet during all of that. When I finally sat back on my heels, it said, in an entirely different tone, "Oh." "What?" I said. "The one before you never skimmed," it said. The broth came up the color of weak tea and smelled, as far as my useless nose could report, clean. I have been told since that it smelled of rain on hot rock and of something green. When I judged it done, something in the room changed, the way a room changes when a door opens somewhere else in the house, and words arrived. They did not appear in the air. They arrived the way a memory arrives, complete, without being read. The larder writes, "Gray wolf, young, male, boiled with root and deep salt, 1 hour, done correctly. Gift, temporary, quickness, 4 hours. Seat, permanent, held open. Feed 1. I said out loud, "What is a seat?" "You have a table inside you," the pot said. "Every properly cooked thing wants to sit down at it, and a guest sits forever. But a guest does not sit down for a cook who only cooks for himself. Feed one person the same dish, and the seat closes, and the quickness is yours for good. That is the price, and it never goes down. It goes up. And if I eat it and feed nobody, then you have a hot dinner," it said, "and in a week you would be arguing with me about why we should not just eat it raw, which is the argument everybody down here has already won." I ate a full bowl standing up, the way cooks do, and I felt the heat of it in my chest and nothing else, no flavor, the same beloved nothing I had eaten for 7 years. Whatever else had changed, that had not, and it was mine. Then I picked up the pot and the knife and the wolf's heart wrapped in a sheet of the broad, pale leaf that grew near the water, and I went out through the arch to find one person. The way up took a long time. Once I passed a place where the floor was scattered with bones cracked open lengthwise, and I understood, without wanting to, that they had been cracked by hands and not by teeth. At last the passage began to climb, and the air went cold and salty, and the light changed from honey to a raw gray, and I came out of a stone throat in the side of a hill into open weather, and I put the pot down and had to sit for a while, because there was a sea. It was late afternoon. The sea was a flat pewter, and the wind came off it hard enough to lean on. Below the hill, a town lay along a curve of shingle beach, 200 roofs of black slate and turf, a stone jetty, boats hauled up. Above the cave mouth, somebody had built a low wall of stacked stones, and behind it, on a folded blanket with a brass bell in her lap and a tally stick in her hand, sat a girl of about 11. She looked at me. She looked at the pot. She looked at the cave mouth behind me, and she picked up the bell, and then she did not ring it. "You came out of the deep," she said. "Yes." "Nobody comes out of the deep at this hour," she said. "They come out at noon, or they do not come out. I have been counting for 2 years. 406 down, 361 up. Somebody has to count," she said. "I am Ola. What is in the pot?" I thought about lying. I have thought since about how much of the year that followed came out of the fact that I did not. "Wolf," I said, "from down there. I cooked it. It is safe if it is cooked properly, and I cooked it properly, and I would like you to eat some, and if you do not want to, I will not ask twice." She went very still. The wind pushed her hair sideways across her face, and she did not move it. "That is the worst thing you could have said to anybody in this town," she said. "Why?" "Because nothing from below goes in the mouth," she said, in the voice of someone reciting a rule so old it has gone smooth. "That is the whole law. That is the only law we actually keep. My grandfather says it before every meal, like other people say a prayer. Warden Ives can burn your house for it, and nobody will stop him. There is a stone in the churchyard with 11 names on it, and they are all people who ate." I picked the pot up and set it on the wall between us, and lifted the lid so the steam came out and went away flat in the wind. "Then do not eat," I said. "I will take it back down." She looked into the pot for a long moment. Later, I asked her why she did it, and she gave 3 answers over 3 years, and I think all of them were true. That she was hungry, and it had been a thin winter. That the broth looked like ordinary broth, and that shocked her. And that I had put it down and stepped back, and no adult had ever put a thing down and stepped back from her before. She ate 2 mouthfuls out of the ladle, then a third. Then she handed the ladle back and wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist and said, "That is good. That is really good." And then her eyes went wide, and she said, "Oh." The larder writes, "Gray wolf broth, eaten by one, guest seated, quickness, permanent, yours." Note: every guest brings his shadow. The wolf's shadow is the running. Do not run. The world did not slow down. That is how people describe it, and it is wrong. What happened was that my body arrived at things slightly before I had finished deciding on them. When the wind knocked Ola's tally stick off the wall, I caught it at my ankle without bending, and I did not remember starting to reach. Underneath, in the long muscles of my legs, there was a low, restless pressure, a wanting to be moving away, and fast, and now. And it took me a moment to recognize it, because I had felt it before, in another life, in the last hour of a double shift. Ola was staring at her own hands. "I am fast," she said in a small voice. "For 4 hours," I said. "Then it goes. It stays with me and it visits you. I do not entirely know why yet." "Because you are the cook and I am the guest," she said, which was, I found out much later, exactly right, and she had simply guessed it out of the shape of the words. She rang the bell then. Not for me. She rang it because the sun was on the water, and that was the hour she rang it. And down in the town, a door opened, and a man came out and looked up the hill. And I saw him see me, and I saw him see the pot. "Who is that?" I said. "That is Warden Ives," said Ola. "You should sit down and let him walk up. He is very slow, and he likes to arrive first." While we waited, I asked the pot the question I had been carrying up 900 stairs. "You said him," I said. "About the wolf. Not it, him." The pot's lid settled. "Wolves are not born in the deep," it said. "Nothing is born in the deep. Everything down there walked in." Warden Ives took 11 minutes to climb the hill and arrived unhurried and unsurprised, which I came to learn was the whole of his character. He was past 60, built like a barrel left out in the weather, and he carried a long iron rod with a socket on the end for a coal. He did not point it at me. He set the butt of it on the ground and leaned on it and looked at the pot. "Girl," he said, "go home." "I ate some," said Ola. "I heard you ring the bell and then not ring it," said Ives. "That took you about the time it takes to eat some. Go home, Ola. Tell your grandfather I will come by." She went. She went fast, and I saw Ives notice how fast, and I saw him decide not to say it out loud, and that told me more about him than anything he said in the following year. "You are new," he said to me. "I am," I said. "Then I will say it once plainly, and then I will stop being polite. Nothing from below goes in the mouth. Not meat, not marrow, not the water, not the little white berries that grow near the water and look exactly like food. There are 11 names on the stone in our churchyard, and my sister is one of them. She was very fast for about a month. Then she was very fast and she did not sleep, and then she stopped talking. And then we found her in the sheep pen, and I will not tell you the rest." "She ate it raw," I said. "She ate it however it was," he said. "Cooked, raw, salted, dried, it does not matter. It is the same flesh either way." "It is not," I said. Ives looked at me for a while. The wind pushed at both of us. "You are so sure," he said, "that I already know how this ends." I put my hand flat on the lid of the pot. It was still warm. "I'm not sure," I said. "I have a way to check that is better than being sure, and it is that I feed people and then look at them for a month. If your sister was fast for a month and then stopped talking, then a month is the test, and I will take it. Do not let me into the town. Let me stand on this hill where the girl can see me from her wall and count." He tapped the iron rod twice against the stone. "You cook up here," he said. "Not one step past the first fence. You feed nobody under 16 years. And when the month is over, I will come up and look at whoever ate. And if I do not like their eyes, I will burn the pot with you holding it." "That is fair," I said. "It is not fair," he said. "It is slow. Fair would be burning it now. I am giving you slow because you did not lie to me, and because that girl has eaten meat 4 times since the sea took her father, and I counted them, and it makes me sick that I know the number." He went down the hill without hurrying, and at the bottom he stopped and spoke to a man mending a net, and by evening every roof in Coldwater knew there was a cook above the mouth of the deep. The first night the quickness would not let me sleep. The wolf's shadow ran under my skin, and I got up 11 times, and by dawn I had walked the whole ridge twice for no reason. "That is the shadow," said the pot when the sky went gray. "It never entirely goes. It gets small. It gets small faster if you are doing something with your hands." "Then I will do something with my hands," I said, and got up and built a hearth. I built it out of the loose stone of the ridge, a horseshoe 2 courses high, open to the west so the wind would draw, with a slab of honey-colored stone from the mouth of the deep across it as a griddle, and that slab held heat all day off 1 coal, which is a thing no stone in my old life would have done. By noon I had made a kitchen out of a hillside, and my hands had stopped shaking, and I understood the pot had told me exactly what to do, and had let me think it was my idea. The book was in the lid. I found it that morning when I went to scrub the pot, and the lid came off entirely in my hands, which it had not done before. Inside was a flat compartment, and in it a book bound in gray hide, written in a small, tight hand in a language I had never seen and could read perfectly, which I had also noticed about the words the girl and the warden spoke, and had decided not to think about yet. Recipes, mostly. Gray wolf young, boiled with root. Pale crab from the second gallery, steamed on stone, gives balance for 2 hours. Do not use the shell. Cave hen, roasted, gives nothing, is simply very good. Note this. And every few pages, in among the recipes, a name and a date and a line. The man who was the 3rd wolf came in at the mouth in the year of the low tide, took 11 years to stop being himself, cooked and eaten by 4. Rest. There were 41 such entries, and the last one was unfinished. It said, Divin, and then the ink stopped, and there was a long brown drag across the page, as if the pen had been pulled sideways off it. "Who wrote this?" I said. "The cook before you," said the pot. "What happened to him?" "He got full," said the pot, and would not say another word about it for 2 months, no matter how I asked. The huntresses came up the coast road on the 4th day. There were 9 of them, in 2 parties, come down from 3 towns north. The deep had opened 100 years ago, in 11 places along 400 miles of coast. And what people went down for was not food, it was material. A wolf's hide took a dye no sheep's hide would hold. A golem's stone core, ground fine, made a mortar that would not fail in salt air. A cinder worm's throat lining, dried, made the bellows cloth for the smelters at the head of the bay. All of it was worked, none of it was eaten, and the whole economy of that coast ran on the single agreement that the below stays below the neck. They hunted in parties of 4 or 5, and on our stretch the parties were mostly women, and there was no mystery in it. The men went out on the water, and the sea took men at a steady rate, and the families had long ago sorted themselves so one trade could not empty a house. 8 of the 9 walked past my hearth and looked at me the way you look at a man doing something obscene at a distance. The 9th stopped. She was maybe 25, tall, with the shoulders of somebody who threw things for a living, and she was carrying her left arm against her body in a way I recognized from 100 kitchen accidents. "That smell," she said. "Wolf," I said, "neck and shoulder. There is barley in it now because a man in the town traded me a bag for a hide, and he traded at night and asked me not to say his name, so I will not." "You are the cook," she said. "They said you would be gone in a week. They said Ives has already picked the spot for the fire." She sat down on the stone without being asked, which I liked, and held her forearm and looked at the pot for a while. "I am Nell," she said. "What does it do?" "Gray wolf broth makes you quick," I said. 4 hours, then it goes. It does not turn you. I ate it 4 days ago, and a girl in the town ate it 4 days ago. And if you want, you can walk down and look at her. And you should, because you should not believe me." "I already looked at her," said Nell. "She was carrying 2 buckets up the beach steps, and she went up them like a goat, and her grandfather was watching her like she was a ghost. That is why I stopped." She lifted the left arm slightly. "Broke it yesterday," she said. "2nd time this year. Not on anything. I threw a spear at a stone hound and my own arm broke throwing it. It is a thing in my family. Our bones are like chalk pipes. We are strong. That is the joke of it. Strong enough to break ourselves. My mother went down the deep 11 times, and on the 11th her hip went while she was walking, just walking, and she could not be carried out fast enough." "I am sorry," I said. "I did not tell you for that," said Nell. "I told you because there is a thing down there called a stone golem, and it has a core in its chest, and every mason on this coast grinds those cores into mortar, and swears that a wall built on it will outlast the hill. And I have been thinking about that particular sentence for about 2 years. And then a stranger turns up on the hill above my mouth of the deep with a pot." I looked at her arm. I looked at her face, which was doing the thing faces do when someone has decided to say a shameful hope out loud and is bracing to be laughed at. "Eat first," I said. "Wolf, today, it is what I have. If you feel anything I have not told you to expect, I want to know, and I want you to tell me in front of Ives, not in private." She ate 2 bowls. She was quick for 4 hours, and she used them to run the whole ridge and come back grinning like a much younger woman. And then it went out of her the way a fever goes, all at once, and she sat down heavily on the stone and said, "Oh, that is horrible." And I said, "Yes, it is. I should have warned you about the going." The larder writes, Gray wolf broth, eaten by 2. Seat already closed. No further payment required. Note: gifts do not stack. A guest may sit at your table only. I read that last line 3 times. She cannot keep it, I said to the pot. Ever, no matter how many times she eats. No, said the pot. Say it plainly. The pot's lid rose and fell. A permanent guest sits at one table, it said. Yours, because you cook and do not want. Everyone else gets ours. If they want more than ours, there is exactly one other way, and it is the way everything down there took, and you have seen what it makes. I sat with that for a long moment, watching Nell rub the ache out of her legs, unaware. Do not tell her yet, said the pot. I am going to tell her tonight, I said. You will lose her. Then I will lose her honestly, I said, and I told her that night, and she did not leave. She went white, and then she was angry in a flat, quiet way that had nothing to do with me, and she stood at the edge of the ridge with her back to my fire for a long time. When she came back, she said, 4 hours is 4 hours, and my mother had none. And how many people do you need for the golem? 3, I said. That is what it will cost to seat it. Then I will find you 3, she said, and I will be one of them, and I will carry the spear that opens the golem. And when you cook it, you will let me eat first, and I will have 4 hours in my life where my bones are not made of chalk, and I will use them. The woman who made 3 possible arrived on the 11th day, walking up from the jetty with wet hair and a diver's belt of lead weights over her shoulder. And she came straight to my fire and looked into the pot before she looked at me. Is it true you have been down and come back up? She said. 3 times now? Only the first gallery. I am not a fighter. I go down, I take what somebody else has killed, and I come up. Then you have not been in the water, she said. Below the 3rd floor, the whole thing is drowned. Not flooded, drowned. The way a wreck is drowned, on purpose, a long time ago. There are galleries down there with doorways and cut steps, and I have been to the edge of them 11 times, and never further than 1 breath will carry me. And 1 breath carries me further than anyone else on this coast, and it is not far enough. She sat down. She had a wide, flat face, sunburnt across the nose, and eyes that did not move around the way most people's do. Surah, she said. Bram. I know, she said. There is a fisherman at Half Hill who says a dead man came out of the mouth at Coldwater carrying a pot, and there is a warden who says there is a fool on the hill, and there is a girl who is telling everybody she can run faster than her cousins now. I walked 11 miles on the strength of a girl bragging. You should know that about how information moves on this coast. She asked what the pot could do, and I told her all of it, including the 4 hours, including the 1 table, including the 41 entries in the dead man's book about people who had gone down and become things. She listened with her chin on her fist. Then she said, 3 years ago, my sister went into the mouth at Half Hill with a party of 4. The other 3 came out. They heard her call twice and then not again. My mother had her name cut into the wall of the church a year later, which is what we do instead of a grave. 9 months ago, a diver went to the edge of the drowned floors and came up saying something in the water had called his name, and nobody believes him. But nobody at Half Hill knows my sister's name except the 11 of us who lived on that street. And the name he said in the right voice for that street. I did not say anything for a moment. There is an animal down there, said Surah at last, called a hollow eel. It has no lungs and no gills, and it does not come up for air, and it does not drown. Every diver on this coast has looked at that animal and thought a very ugly thought. I want to know if the ugly thought works if you cook it. Then come with us on Thursday, said Nell from the other side of the fire, where she had been sharpening her spear and pretending not to listen.
The cook needs 3 people to eat a golem's heart, and we have 2, and you look like you can carry. We went down on the Thursday, 4 of us, Nell and Sura and a woman from Nell's mother's old party who did not want her name in anybody's book, and me. I had made them wolf broth at dawn, and for the first 4 hours we went down at a pace that should have frightened me, and did not. The deep was not a cave. It was too regular for that.
As you went down, the walls began to remember being built, and there were places where the floor was clearly a floor, worn in the middle the way a stair is worn, by feet, over a very long time. The golems lived in the 3rd gallery, where slabs of fallen roof lay about like broken furniture. They looked like a pile of stones that had decided on a shape and were not confident about it, and they moved slowly until they moved quickly. Nell's party had learned that a golem cannot be cut and can be tipped, and that a tipped golem spends 11 or 12 seconds arranging itself back into a pile, and that in those seconds the seam of soft red rock under the left arm can be opened with a spear if the spear is put in by somebody strong. That was Nell. I did not see her do it. I was behind a slab where I had been firmly told to stay. I heard the shout and the crack and a long grinding slide, and when I came out the golem was down and dark, and Nell was sitting on the ground with her right shoulder out of its socket, which she had done to herself with her own throw. "That is the family curse," she said through her teeth, while Sura put the shoulder back with a movement that told me she had done it a great many times. "Do you see it now, cook? Do you see what it is like to be strong?" "I see it," I said. The heart was in the chest cavity, if a pile of stones can be said to have a chest. It was the size of a loaf, gray, with a red seam through it, and warm in a way that had nothing to do with the room. I carried it up on my back for 9 hours. I ruined the first one. I want that written down clearly, because for a long time I told the story without it. I did what any sensible cook does with a hard thing, which is to give it time and moisture. I set it in the pot with water and let it go all night, and in the morning it had not changed, and I let it go all the next day, and by evening it had gone slightly soft on the outside like a bad potato. I shaved a little off, and I was reaching for a bowl when the words came. The larder writes, "Stone golem, core, boiled in water, 31 hours, done wrongly. This dish carries the shadow whole. Serve it, and the eater takes the standing and the stillness together and does not stop being still." I sat down next to my own fire and put my hands over my face. Nell was asleep on the other side of the hearth with her arm strapped across her chest. She had eaten nothing for 2 days because I had told her to keep her stomach empty for it, and she had been so cheerful about being careful. And I had been 1 bowl away from feeding her a thing that would have made her a monument. "You would have known," said the pot. "I always tell you." "You tell me after," I said. "I tell you when it is finished, because that is the only moment there is anything to tell. This is why the cook before you wrote everything down. I threw the ruined core into the sea, and then I went back up and read the book from the first page to the last, and found what I should have found on the first morning. Halfway through, in the middle of a note about crab shell, the cook before had written 1 line that had nothing to do with crab. Stone does not soften in water. Stone softens in sour. The white berries grew in wet clusters near every seam of running water in the first gallery, and Ives had told me on the first afternoon that they looked exactly like food, which was how I knew they were on the list of things that had killed somebody. I picked 4 pounds and crushed them in a wooden bowl, and the juice came out clear and thin, and ate a bright ring into the rust on my knife inside a minute. We took the second golem on the 4th attempt, over 9 days, and it cost us a spear and the top half of Sura's left ear, and a great deal of Nell's pride, because on the last attempt she did not throw. She put the spear in with both hands from the ground, braced in close, which was slower and more dangerous, and did not break her, and she was furious about it for a week, and then she was not. The second heart went into the pot with 2 parts water and 1 part berry juice, and it simmered from the evening until the middle of the next day, 17 hours, and I did not sleep and did not leave it. At the 11th hour, the gray stone began to give under the spoon. At the 14th, it broke apart into something pale and marbled, like the marrow of an enormous bone, and the liquid went thick and glossy the way a proper stock goes when it decides to. At the 17th hour, I salted it and took it off the coal. The larder writes, "Stone golem, core, simmered in sour and water, 17 hours, done correctly. Gift, temporary, set bone, 6 hours. Seat, permanent, held open. Feed 3. Nell ate first, standing, because she had asked to and because I had promised. She drank it like a woman drinking after a long day's work, and set the bowl down carefully and said in a very small voice, "Oh, that is quiet." "What is quiet?" said Sura. "My whole body," said Nell. She walked down to the beach and picked up a stone the size of a bread oven that 4 men use rollers to move, and carried it 11 steps and put it down, and nothing in her broke. And then she sat on it and cried in front of 9 strangers and did not seem to mind at all. Sura ate second and spent her 6 hours on the seabed at the foot of the jetty, moving rock that had fouled the fisherman's ground for 2 generations, and said afterward only that she had stopped being afraid of the weight of water. The third was Hob.
He was the oldest boatman in Coldwater and had been sitting on an upturned crate watching my fire from 200 yards every evening for 3 weeks. He came up the day after the golem, looked at the pot a while, and said, "The last one had a black kettle, and he was a smaller man than you, and he did not skim." I stood up very slowly, the way you do when a bird lands near you. "You knew him?" I said. "I rode him to the mouth at Half Hill 9 times, and to Low Cross 4, said Hob. 11 years ago. Everybody has agreed to have forgotten him, which is not the same as forgetting him. I will eat your stone, cook. I am 71, and my back has been going out since I was 40, and if it kills me, it will save my daughter a difficult conversation." He ate. His back was quiet for 6 hours, and he spent them mending a boat, and while he mended it, he told me 3 things that changed my life. When the 6th hour of the 3rd eater ended, the words came. The larder writes,
"Stone golem core, eaten by 3. Guest seated, set bone, permanent, yours." Note: the golem's shadow is the stillness. You will find it easier not to move. Move anyway. It came into me like cold water going into a dry pot, from the pelvis outward. My bones did not become heavier. They became certain. I stood up, and my old ankle, which had been giving me an opinion every morning for 20 years in 2 separate lives, said nothing at all. And underneath it, exactly as promised, the stillness came. A low, patient suggestion that I could stay where I was, that things would resolve themselves, that there was no particular reason to stand up tomorrow. I got up at dawn the next day and moved anyway, and I have got up and moved anyway every day since. And that is most of what I know about being strong. Warden Ives climbed the hill on the 30th day. He had a list. He was that sort of man. He made Ola stand at the wall and looked at her eyes for a long time and asked 4 questions that were not about food at all. What is your cousin's name? What did you dream? Are you hungry now? What do you want? She said, Pell, I dreamed about a horse in the church. No, I had bread. I want to learn my letters properly so I can keep the count in a book instead of on a stick. Ives grunted. He did the same with Nell and with Sura, and last of all with Hob, who told him to get out of his light. Then he stood in front of my hearth with the iron rod in his hand, and the whole town watching from the beach below, and he said, "I have known that girl since she was born, and she is exactly herself, and I hate it." "You hate it," I said. "I hate it," he said, "because my sister ate on a Tuesday and was fast for a month, and now a stranger tells me there was a way to do it right, and nobody found it, and she is under a stone in my churchyard. What you are doing up here is not good news to me. It is the worst news I have ever had. It is 30 years late." He did not burn the pot. He set his coal in the socket of the rod and lit my hearth fire with it, and then he walked back down. "That is a permit," said Hob from his crate. "That is what a permit looks like here." The three things Hob told me while his back was quiet were these, and he told them in the order of a man laying out tools. The first was that the cook before me had also come out of the mouth of the deep instead of going into it. Hob had been 40 then, mending the same boat he was mending now, and a small man in strange clothes had walked down the hill with an iron pot under his arm and been sick on the shingle. And when he could talk, he had said that he had died in a city that did not exist. Nobody believed him about the city. Everybody believed him about the pot within a month because he fed them. The second was that the man had worked that coast for 11 years and fed hundreds and then changed. Not suddenly. Hob was careful about that. He got quieter and better and stronger, and he started keeping the good dishes for himself. And there was always a reason, and the reasons were always sensible. And in the 11th year, he sat in Hob's boat and said a sentence Hob had been carrying ever since, which was, "I have found the last recipe, and I cannot cook it, because I am too full to cook it. And I do not think I can get empty again." The third thing was the name. He said there was a man at the bottom, said Hob, not a monster, a man. The first one to eat from below, before anybody knew what it did, back when the mouths opened and there was a famine on this coast that people still will not talk about. He is still down there, and everything he eats stays in him. He called him the Full King. He said the king has a court, and the court is made of people who went down and did not come up, and that they are not dead and not alive and cannot stop. And then, said Hob, he went down at cold water one morning with the pot under his arm, and he did not come up. And 11 years later, a bigger man came out of the same hole carrying the same pot, and I am 71 and too old to be surprised, so here I am, eating stone with a spoon. I asked the pot that night if all of it was true. The pot said yes, and said nothing else, and it was a year before I understood why. Merritt came up on the 40th day. She came at night, and the first any of us knew of it was the sound of the sheep pens on the eastern side of town going over, all at once, like a fence being unbuttoned. Then a dog started and stopped in the middle of a note, which is a sound I would happily never hear again. I was on the hill with a low fire under a pot of wolf and barley, keeping it warm for the night party coming up out of the mouth. Sura stood up beside me with her weights in her hand and said, "That is not a bear." "There are no bears on this coast," I said. "I know," she said. "It came up the hill toward the fire, and it did not hurry. When it was 30 yards off, it stopped at the edge of the light, and we saw it. And Sura made a sound I will not try to write. It had been a woman, and it still mostly was, and that was the horror of it. There were plates of gray stone growing out of her shoulders the way barnacles grow on a hull, and her right arm was too long, and her legs had the double bend of a running animal, and her jaw did not close properly because there was too much in it. Her hair was still braided. Somebody had braided that hair one morning 3 years ago, and it had held. Her eyes were the worst part. They were perfectly ordinary. Sura said her sister's name. The thing at the edge of the firelight put its head over to one side, which is a movement no person makes, and then its ruined jaw worked and worked, and it said in a voice like a door being dragged, "Hot. It smells the pot," said the pot, from the hearth. "They all smell it. That is what I have been afraid of since the first day.
A properly cooked dish is the one smell down there that means finished, and they have never once in their lives been full. And to them it is the smell of the only thing they want and cannot make. Sura was walking toward her sister with her hands out and her weights on the ground. "Marit," she said. "Marit, it is Sura. Look at me." I have thought about that moment more than any other, because the thing did look at her. It looked at her for a long time with those ordinary eyes and stopped moving entirely. And something in the ruined shape of its face went through an enormous effort. And then it said, in almost the right voice, "Go home." And then it went past her, fast, and took the pot off my hearth with its bare hands. And the iron was at a rolling boil, and it did not care at all. And it drank the whole thing standing up. It did not turn on us. It stood there afterward with barley in its teeth and steam coming off its hands, and made a sound that was neither pain nor pleasure, but something on the far side of both. And then the words came, slower than usual, as if the larder itself were reluctant. The larder writes, "Gray wolf broth, eaten by the well-fed. No seat, no gift. This one has no chairs left. Every place at her table is taken, and none of the guests will stand up. There is one dish that makes a guest stand up. You cannot cook it." "Why not?" I said out loud, into the dark, at a pot. Marit ran. She went down the hill and along the shingle and into the black mouth of the deep, and she left 3 sheep dead behind her, and a boat stove in, and a man in the eastern lane with a broken collarbone, and she left her sister on her knees on the ridge in the dark. They came up the hill the next night with torches and did what people do. There were maybe 30 of them, not a mob so much as a frightened crowd that had agreed on an errand. They scattered my hearthstones down the slope and pulled apart the awning, and a man I had fed twice stood at the back and did not throw anything and did not stop anybody either, and I have never held it against him and never forgotten his face. Nell wanted to stand in front of them. I put my hand flat on her chest and told her not to, and she was strong enough that my hand meant nothing at all, and she stayed anyway, which was the first time I understood she had decided to follow me instead of the other way around. Ives arrived when it was mostly over. He stood in the mess and turned over a broken bowl with his boot and said, "This is not my doing." "I know," I said. "I can hold the law off you," he said. "I cannot hold fear off you. The law is one man with a rod, and fear is everybody's grandmother. That thing came out because you cook. They are right about the cause. They are only wrong about the cure." He looked out at the sea for a while. "My sister used to come to the door," he said, for about 11 days. She would stand in the lane and not come in. We put the food out on the step. She did not want the food. She wanted the finish," I said. "She wanted to be full just once. Nothing you have in your house can do that, and I think I might be able to, and I am not ready, and I need a year." He stood there in my ruined kitchen with his lamp, and I watched a man who had spent 30 years being certain about one thing decide to be uncertain about it in public. "Rebuild it lower," he said at last. "On the flat by the boat sheds where the town can see it from the lanes. Not up here where it looks like a beacon. And feed them, cook, not the huntresses, them. If they are eating out of your pot, they cannot burn it. And if you make them choose between fear and their supper, you will find out some things about people that you will not enjoy, but that will keep you alive." We rebuilt it lower, on the flat, and that was the end of the first month, and the beginning of the thing that everyone afterward called the long table, which for the first 11 days was 2 planks on 4 barrels and a pot. I want to be exact about why I did it, because a great deal was written later about my generosity, and almost none of it was accurate. Part of it was Ives, who was right.
Part of it was that I had run a room once a month in another life where anyone could eat, and had loved that room more than the restaurant that paid for it. But the largest part was arithmetic. The wolf cost 1. The golem cost 3. When I asked the pot how the numbers moved, it said 3 times every time, which meant 9, and then 27, and any dish worth the name at the end of that ladder would cost more people than lived in cold water. I could not get strong alone. The mechanism would not let me. Every step down into that place had to be paid for with a step out into the town. And the only way I would ever stand in front of the man at the bottom was if half the coast had eaten out of my pot first. That is not a virtue. That is a design. I have said so every time anybody tried to make a saint out of me, and nobody has ever believed me. So we fed them. Wolf, mostly, because quickness for 4 hours is a wonderful gift to give a woman who has to get the washing in before the rain. Cave hen, roasted, which gave nothing at all and was simply very good, and which I made more of than anything else that winter, because a dish that gives nothing is the fastest way to prove you are not buying anybody. 9 days in, an old woman ate a bowl of wolf and stood in the lane afterward with her hands on her hips, looking at the hill. I could have used that in the year of the low tide, she said. She nodded at whatever I answered and came back the next day and brought her sister. Winter on that coast is not cold so much as continuous. By the middle of the 2nd month, we had walls on 3 sides and a roof of tarred sail over the long table, a chimney of dry stacked stone that Nell built in 2 afternoons with her bones quiet, and benches enough for 40. By the middle of the 3rd month, we were feeding 60 people a day, and I had stopped being the only one cooking. Ola came every morning before her watch and had learned to break down a wolf better than I could. 2 of Nell's old party ran the bread, which I had nothing to do with, since the pot will not touch anything that did not walk in the deep. Flesh from below or nothing. Salt, water, root, sour berry, and herbs it allowed, because none of them had ever hunted. But a lamb chop laid on that stone came off it as gray paste, once on the day I tested it, and the pot said, "Do not do that again," and I never did. The huntresses came to us because we were warm and because of the 4 hours. A party going down at dawn would eat wolf and be quick until noon. A party after golems would eat stone and be certain until dark. Every one of them ate on the same condition, which was that they told me afterward exactly what they had felt and came back in a month so I could look at their eyes. I kept a book of it. Name, dish, hours, what they used it for, what happened after. 406 entries by the end of that winter. The eel took us 6 weeks. It lived below the 3rd floor, in the drowned galleries, the length of a man's arm, with no lungs and no gills, and it did not surface. The reason it had never been hunted was not that it was dangerous. It was that nobody could stay under long enough to be patient near it. Nell could not swim. That caused a great deal of resentment for 2 weeks, and then it caused an idea, which was that a woman with set bone in her does not need to swim, because she does not float. Sura tied a line to her, and Nell walked along the floor of a drowned corridor in the dark, with a hood of oiled canvas over her head, holding 1 bag of air and a net in her fist. And Sura swam above her, and on the 4th attempt they took 11 hollow eels. I ruined 2 of them before I understood what I was being told. Boiled, it came apart into gray strings, and the larder said done wrongly. Roasted, it went to nothing at all, a little grease and a smell, and the larder said, there is nothing here to write about. I sat looking at the 3rd eel for most of a night. It weighed almost nothing. When you held it up, light came through it in places. It had no lungs and no gills. And I kept saying that sentence to myself, the way you say a customer's complaint over and over until you hear what they actually said. It does not take anything in, I said finally.
Not water, not air. It is hollow. It lives on nothing. So I cannot cook it in anything. Water is a thing, fat is a thing, even air is a thing. It has to cook in nothing. The pot lifted its lid, and inside it there was no coal that night, and no water, and nothing at all. "Put it in," said the pot, "and close me, and set me on the stone, and do not open me for 4 hours. That is the only way this one goes." I did it. 4 hours later, I lifted the lid off a dry pot, and there was a spoonful of clear liquid in the bottom, exactly a spoonful, and a curl of pale meat gone the color of the inside of a shell. And it smelled, Ola said, of the air just before rain. The larder writes, "Hollow eel, cooked in nothing. 4 hours, sealed. Done correctly. Gift, temporary. Breath,
8 hours. The eater does not need air and will not notice that he does not. Seat, permanent, held open. Feed, 9. Note, 9 is not a number of guests. It is a number of witnesses. 9 is a great deal of people to feed a spoonful to, and 11 eels gave me 11 spoonfuls, and no fisherman on that coast was going to eat a thing that made him stop breathing. I put the question to the long table one evening and got the longest silence I had ever heard in that building. Then the merle went over, on the 9th day of the 5th month, in a squall that came in faster than the boats could turn, in front of the whole town. She was a 9-man boat, and she went on her side and did not come back up. 4 other boats got 2 men off her. The rest were under the hull. I stood at the waterline with the flask, while Ives held the crowd back, and 11 men and women who were going into the water anyway drank a spoonful each out of a horn cup. And I told them what it would do in 11 words, and not one of them asked a second question. Which is a thing about that coast I will admire until I die. They walked out. That is what the town saw, and that is why nothing that came after ever really shook us. They put the lead on and walked out along the bottom into a running sea in the dark, and Sura went with them and took the line, and they came back with 6 of the 7, one at a time, on their own feet, out of water over their heads, walking up the shingle like men coming up a lane. The 7th was Ola's uncle, and he was already gone when they reached him, and they brought him up too, because you do. The larder writes, "Hollow eel, eaten by 9. Guest seated. Breath, permanent. Yours." Note, the eel's shadow is the not needing. You will forget to want things. Want them on purpose. The 9 breathed normally by morning, and were themselves in a month, and are themselves now. And Warden Ives, who had held back a crowd of 200 at the waterline while 11 people drank Monster out of a cup, came into the long table that night, sat down at the end of the bench with his rod across his knees, and ate a bowl of wolf and barley in front of everybody, without saying a single word about it. He put the bowl down. He looked around the room until he was sure it had been seen. Then he went home. I stopped being a thing the town tolerated on that day and started being a thing the town had. I dived with Sura 11 days later, and that was the first time I saw the court. A drowned gallery is like a street at night after everyone has gone in. The water was clear and still and not cold, and the corridors ran away in every direction with cut steps and doorways and the worn dip in the middle of every floor. There were rooms with benches in them, and a place that had been quite unmistakably a well. "Nobody built this," said Sura, "in the water." That was the other thing about breath. You could talk. "Somebody built it," I said. "It is a town." "Who lives in a town under a hill under the sea?" she said. "Nobody," I said. "It is under the sea because it sank. Everything down here walked in, the pot says. Maybe the town walked in too." We went 400 yards further than any diver on that coast had ever gone, and then the corridor opened out and we were on the lip of an enormous flooded hall, and I put my hand on Sura's arm and we did not go in. It was the size of a cathedral. There were pillars in rows, and between the pillars, standing on the floor of the hall in the still water, there were people. 200 perhaps. Not swimming, standing the way you stand in a queue, facing one direction, deeper in, where the light did not reach. Some had stone on them, and some had hide, and some were barely changed at all. None of them moved. There was no sound, and with the eel in me, I did not need to breathe, and so there was not even that. At the near end of the third row, there was a woman with a braid. Sura began to go forward, and I held her, and she took hold of my wrist, and I felt the bones grind, and I did not let go, and she stopped. "They are waiting," I said. "For what?" said Sura. I did not know then. I know now. They were waiting the way a man waits outside a house where a meal is being made. They had been waiting 100 years, in rows, in the dark, in the water, because there is nothing else to do when you cannot be finished and cannot die. We went up. We were very quiet for a day. On the second day, I got the pot out and set it on the stone and said, "All right, tell me the dish that makes a guest stand up." "I have been waiting 11 years to be asked that by somebody who had a chance of doing it," said the pot. Then it wrote. Not a ticket, not the short lines that came at the end of a cook. This came slowly, one line at a time, and each line arrived like a stone put down. The larder writes, "There is a dish that gives no strength. It gives the trait no thing in the deep has ever had. When it is eaten, the eater is full and stops, and everything he took sits down and stands up again as what it was. Its name in the ledger of the deep is divinity, because down here a thing that can stop is a god. Ingredients, 3 and 1 condition. The first is water from beneath the last floor, that has never touched a mouth. The second is salt from the coast above, carried down by a living hand. The third is the marrow of the first thing you ever cooked. The condition is a cook who is not full. There has never been one." I read it, and read it again, and looked up at the sky over Coldwater, which was doing the flat gray thing it did all winter. "The first thing I ever cooked," I said. "Gray wolf, young, male," said the pot. "You left the bones on the floor of the first gallery. They are still there. Nothing down there eats bone." "And a cook who is not full," I said. "Yes," said the pot, and there was something in the way it said it that made me not ask the next question that night. Grell came the following evening. He walked up out of the mouth at sunset and along the coast road into town like a man arriving for an appointment. And the strangest thing about him was that he used the road. He was tall and thin, and wore the rags of a coat with a brass chain still on it. And he had been, I found out later, a crier, which on that coast is a real trade. What he had kept out of his old life was his voice and his manners. What he had gained were the mouths. There were 4 of them. One was where a mouth belongs. The others were in the palm of his left hand, at the base of his throat, and one at the top of his chest that opened when he took a breath in. And they all moved when he spoke, slightly out of time, like a room repeating a prayer. He stopped at a polite distance from the long table and waited until the doorway was full of people, because he understood an audience. "Cook," he said, "my name is Grell, and I am the king's mouth," which is a joke he made, and I am obliged to repeat. "I am not here to fight. I am here to say a thing out loud in front of witnesses, because the king is very old and very correct about such matters." "Say it," I said. "The king has read your pot," said Grell. "We felt it 2 nights ago," he said, and all 4 mouths said it. It went through 200 of us, standing in the water like a bell rung in a house. A recipe was written, and the name of it is divinity. And there is not one of us down there who did not know, in the moment it was written, exactly what it would do to us. Some of us screamed. Some of us laughed. 11 of us started walking toward the upstairs before the king spoke, and they were stopped, and I am not going to describe how. He straightened the brass chain on his coat. "By the king's word," said Grell, and his voice went into the crier's cadence, flat and carrying, so that it reached the top of the lanes. "Flesh from below belongs below. The eaters of the deep are the king's court, and they are not sick, and there is nothing in them to be cured. The cook on the coast is not a thief and not a heretic. He is the last hunger, and he will be answered.
and the king himself will come up for the answering. Until then, his court will come up in his place, every night, at every mouth, until the pot is cold." The room behind me had gone entirely silent.
"That is the message," said Grell, in his own voice again, and the small mouths in his hand and his throat closed one after another. "Now I will add a thing that is mine and not his. I have been standing in that water for 91 years. I remember the price of herring in the year of the low tide, and I remember my wife's name. When your pot wrote that recipe, the mouth in my chest opened by itself and would not shut for an hour. Whatever you do, cook, do it before I get used to hoping." He walked back down to the mouth of the deep and went in, and nobody stopped him. And behind me a woman started to cry, and Ives said, "Well," and put both hands on the table. That was the beginning of the bad half of the year. They came up every night for 11 weeks, not in numbers at first, and not always at Coldwater. 2 at Half Hill on the first night, 4 at Low Cross, 1 at a farm above the valley that had nothing to do with any of it, because a well-fed does not have a plan, only a direction. They came toward the smell of finished food, and the smell was on my fire, and the fire was in the middle of a town. We learned that they cannot be reasoned with and can be delayed by anything heavy, that a spear works if Nell throws it and it goes through the neck, and that a fresh one could sometimes be turned around by somebody shouting their name, and that doing so felt worse than fighting them. We lost 11 people between the 5th month and the 8th, and I will not write their names here because they are cut into the wall of the church at Coldwater. What kept us alive was fire. We found it out on a bad night in the 7th month when a lamp went over into the tar of a boat shed, and the shed took light, and the thing that had walked through a wall without noticing it turned around and would not come near the flame. Not could not. Would not, the way a horse will not step onto ice. "Fire," said the pot when I came running back to the table with a burnt hand. Of course, fire is the one thing that is only ever a finishing. You cannot half burn a thing. They have never met anything in their lives that finishes. So we lit the coast, a pit of driftwood and tar at every mouth with a watch on it, fed out of my pot before their shift. And it was not enough, because tar runs out, and because a fire on a beach does nothing for a woman walking home in the rain, and because I had begun to understand a thing about the hall under the sea that made my hands cold. There is no fire under water. And divinity, whatever else it was a dish, and a dish is made over heat. The cinder worm lived in the 5th gallery, which is dry and hot, and where the honey light in the walls runs so thick it hurts to look at. It is not a dragon out of a story. It is 11 feet long and built like a lizard left too near the stove, and it has no wings. And it makes a fire that does not need air. That is the whole point of the bellows cloth the smelters buy. You can put a worm's flame in a sealed box, and it goes on burning. It took us 9 weeks and 3 attempts, and it cost Nell 4 fingers of her left hand, which she says she does not miss, which is a lie she tells cheerfully. I cooked it the way the book told me to cook a thing that carries its own heat, which is to say, I did not add any. Throat and the long muscle of the flank, sour berry, deep water, 1 root, and the pot set on a cold hearth with no coal under it at all. And it came to a boil by itself in 11 minutes, and stayed there for a day and a night, while the whole long table watched the fire that was not there. The larder writes, "Cinderworm, throat and flank, simmered in its own heat, 27 hours, done correctly. Gift, temporary, the fire that needs no air, 10 hours, seat, permanent, held open, feed, 27. Note, the worm's shadow is the burning. You will want to finish things. Some things are not finished by burning. 27 people ate in one night at 3 towns out of one pot carried in Hobb's boat down a bay full of well-fed on the 11th day of the 9th month. Ives ate 7th, and Ola ate last, because she had turned 16 in the summer and had spent the whole evening making sure everybody knew it. I felt the seat close in the middle of that room with 100 people shouting, and it went into me not like cold water, but like an argument. Fire that needs no air lives in the hands, it turns out. I could hold it and put it where I wanted, and it would burn on a wet rope or on the flat of a wave, and it went out when I told it to. The first thing I did with it was light my own hearth without kindling. The second, 3 nights later, was to stand between the boat sheds and a thing that had been a man from Low Cross and hold up my hand and watch it stop and back away and go down the beach without touching anyone. That was the night I began to go wrong. By the 10th month, I had 4 guests at my table: quickness, set bone, breath, fire. I was 51 years old, in a body that did not report an opinion about anything. I could run down the coast road faster than a horse, stand in the surf and not be moved, walk on the floor of the sea, and put fire on my palm and make a thing that had eaten 100 years of the world turn around and go home. And the pot had told me, in writing, that the last recipe required a cook who was not full. I asked it, at last, in the middle of the 10th month, what that meant in practice. I asked it late at night, with the fire down and nobody in the building, which should have told me something about my own intentions. "It means your table must be empty," said the pot. "I have 4, I said. "Then it must be 4 less than 4. "Can a guest be made to stand up?" "Yes," said the pot. "That is the other half of the rule, and I have not said it before because the last man I told it to spent 11 years finding reasons not to use it. A guest will stand up from your table if you offer his chair to somebody else and mean it. Cook the dish again. Serve it to one person. Name the guest out loud and give him away. He will sit down in them and not come back. And it is permanent for them and gone for you. And there is no borrowing and no half of it and no getting it back afterward." I stood in my own kitchen with my hand on the cold stone, and I heard myself say, out loud, in a perfectly reasonable voice, "Not yet." There were reasons, and I want to be fair to the man I was that night, because he was not lying. He was only choosing which true things to say. If I gave the fire away, I could not stand in the lane. If I gave the bone away, I could not carry the pot down 9 hours of stair. If I gave the breath away, I could not reach the hall at all, and then the recipe was a piece of writing and nothing else. Every one of those sentences was true. Every one of them was the exact shape of the sentence the cook before me had said in a boat between Half Hill and Low Cross. I kept the 4 guests for 11 weeks, and in those weeks I got better at everything and fed fewer and fewer people myself, because I was busy, because I was needed on the beach, because it was a poor use of a rare heart to spend it on a fisherman's knee. Hobb said it to me in the 11th week. He was 72 by then and had stopped rowing and had not stopped sitting on his crate. "You have started keeping the good ones," he said. I did not answer. "He said the same thing," said Hobb, "word for word. That is not what I mean. He never said a wrong thing in his life. Every reason that man gave me was a good reason, and I agreed with all of them at the time, and he went down that hole full to the neck and never came up, and I rowed him there, and I have been sitting on this crate for 11 years. I said, if I empty myself, I will be a 51-year-old cook with no fire in his hands and a monster in every lane. Yes, said Hobb. And if I do not, I said, I will be the strongest man on this coast forever, and Merritt will stand in that water forever, and Grell will get used to hoping. Yes,
said Hob. Then he got up off his crate, which took him a while, and put his hand on my shoulder, which he had never done, and said, "The difference between you and him is that he was never once asked out loud, and I am too old to be polite, so I am asking. Which one are you going to be, Cook?" I stood at the mouth of the deep for most of that night. Nell found me there with her hand wrapped and did not ask anything.
She sat down on the stone wall where Ola used to keep the count and looked out at the black water with me. "I know what it costs," she said eventually. "The pot told Sura, and Sura told me, and we have both known for 2 days, and we have both been waiting to see whether you would say it yourself." "I am going to say it now," I said. "Say it then," said Nell. "I gave them away over 4 days at the end of the 11th month, in front of the whole town, because a thing done in a room is different from a thing done in front of witnesses, and because I did not entirely trust myself to do it in a room. Set Bone went first. I cooked the last golem core we had, 17 hours in sour and water, and stood at the head of the long table with the bowl in my hands and said, in the flat voice you use for an order, "This chair belongs to Nell now." And she drank it, looking at me over the rim the whole time. It went out of me the way the pot said it would. Not painfully. My hips remembered they were 51, and my old ankle woke up and made its remarks for the first time in 9 months, and it has made them every morning since, and I have come to like it, the way you like a clock in another room. Nell put the bowl down and picked up the end of the bench with 11 people on it and set it down. Then she went outside, and when I followed, she was standing in the rain at the edge of the water with her arms at her sides and her face up. "It is quiet," she said. "It is going to be quiet tomorrow." "Yes, and the day after that. It does not go. It is yours." She did not thank me that night. She thanked me 11 days later, in the dark, at the bottom of the deep, in a way I will come to. Breath went to Sura the next day, 1 spoonful in a horn cup. I named her and gave it, and she sat very still and said, "I cannot feel it." And I said, "No, you will not. The eel's whole gift is not noticing." And Nell said, "Walk into the sea." And she did, and stayed in 2 hours, and never afterwards spoke of the drowned corridors as a place she visited. Quickness went to Ola on the 3rd day. "Do not run," I told her, when the wolf's shadow came into her and her legs started asking. "It gets small if you have something to do with your hands." "I always have something to do with my hands," she said, which was true, and she has been all right ever since. Fire went last, and fire went to Ives. There was an argument about that, and Nell was on the wrong side of it, and I understood why. Against a crowd held back from my throat once, and a hearth lit once, and a bowl of wolf eaten in public once, there were 30 years of a rod with a socket on the end. I gave it to him because he was the man who was going to be standing in the lanes when I was under the sea, and because in a year I had learned exactly one useful thing about him, which was that he had never once stopped doing the thing he believed protected that town, and all I had ever had to do was change what the thing was. He drank the worm broth in the doorway of the long table with the whole town watching, and the fire that needs no air came into his hands, and he looked at his own palms with an expression I could not read. 30 years I carried a coal in an iron rod, he said. Do you know what that rod is for? Burning the house of anybody who ate. That is what it was made for. I burned 2 houses with it. He closed his hands, and the flame went out. I will keep the rod, he said. It will be a rod.
And then I was empty. A 51-year-old cook with a sore ankle, and I sat down on the bench in my own kitchen and felt more frightened than at any point in that entire year, which surprised me until I thought about it. Fear is a thing that comes back when the guests stand up. It had been sitting outside the door for 11 months waiting for a chair. The larder writes, "Table empty. Guests none. Condition met for the first time in the ledger of the deep." Note: temporary guests do not sit down. You may eat like everyone else. Which is how the cook went down the hole on a spoonful of eel and a bowl of worm, on a clock, like every huntress I had ever fed. We went on the first morning of the 13th month, Sura, Nell, and me. Hob rode us round to the mouth and shook my hand on the shingle in a way we both understood, and he was still alive when we came back, which I had not allowed myself to expect. Ola stood at the wall above the mouth with her book.
411 down, she said. 389 up. Make it right, I said. I intend to, she said. We stopped in the first gallery. It was still the room I had woken in. The honey light in the veins of the stone, the roots in the cracks, the salt crust up the wall, the seam where the water came out. I had been through it 100 times in a year and had never once looked in the corner, because a man does not look at the place where he woke up dead. The bones were where I had left them. Nothing down there eats bone. A gray heap, dry, in the shape of an animal that had been broken down carefully by somebody who knew how. I knelt and cracked the long bone of the foreleg on the stone, and the marrow inside was still good, waxy and pale. And the pot said, "Before you put that in the bag, I am going to tell you whose it is." I stopped with my hand in the bone. "Say it," I said. "Wolves are not born in the deep," said the pot. "I told you that on the first evening, and you have carried it around ever since like a stone in your shoe, and I have watched you not ask, and I am done being grateful." Nell had gone very still behind me. Sura put her lamp down. "He came down here full," said the pot. 4 guests at his table, and the last recipe written in his book, and no way to cook it. And he came down anyway to see if the king would let him take the water. The king did not. He stood in that hall for 2 years, and then he did what a very few of them do, which is that he ran. He got as far as the first gallery, and there is a thing that happens when one of them runs, which is that the shape goes. He had a wolf at his table, cook. It stood up in him and took the chair. I sat down on the floor of the first gallery with the bone in my hands. "He hunted this gallery for 11 years, said the pot, and he had my handle in his teeth for most of them, because a pot goes with its cook, and there was nothing left in him that could cook or write or say a word to me, and nothing left in him that could stop, and I could not do one single thing about it except stay." "Who killed him?" I said. "A party of 4 from Half Hill, last year in the passage above this room. They opened his throat, and he came back in here to be somewhere he knew, and they did not follow him because they were frightened, and he lay down in that corner and died in front of me. And then you were on the floor." "Why me?" I said. "Because a pot must have a cook," it said, "and because you had just put down a pan in a city that does not exist. Whatever writes the larder has one rule about who it takes, and I have thought about it for a year, and I believe the rule is this: it takes cooks who have already spent a long time cooking without eating." "I had no taste," I said. "You had no appetite," said the pot. "It is not the same thing, and it does not matter. The one before you had the finest palate in 11 towns. And on the first evening," I said, "you told me to cook him properly, or he would keep hunting. You were asking me to do the last thing that could be done for him." "Yes," said the pot, "and you skimmed. And I have not been able to say any of this out loud for a year, and I would like to go and cook the recipe he could not cook, using him, and I would like it very much if we could go now." Nell picked up my lamp because my hands were not steady. Sura took the bag of coast salt, gray crystals off the drying racks at Coldwater that 11 people had each put a handful into, because they had heard it must be carried down by a living hand, and each wanted their handful in the bag. Ives had organized it, which I did not learn for a year, and have never mentioned to him. We went down through the galleries, past the golem floor, to the water. I drank my spoonful of eel at the edge. Sura did not need one, and Nell went along the bottom under us with a line at her waist and a lamp in her fist, up into the air pockets and down again, patient as a stone. Grell was waiting in the flooded corridor before the hall. He was standing in the middle of the passage with his coat drifting around him and his brass chain floating up under his chin, and all 4 of his mouths were open, and I do not think he knew that. "I have been standing here for 9 days," he said, "since the pot went quiet in you. All 4 went out of you in 4 days, Cook, and we felt every one. There are 11 of us who cannot stand still any more." He has stopped speaking. "Go past the hall," he said. "Do not go through it. Along the north row and down. The stair to the dry floor is behind the last pillar, and there is no trick in it, and he will not come up to you, because he has not been up that stair in 90 years. "Why are you helping me?" I said. "Because you got up from your own table," said Grell, "and every one of us has been trying to do that for a century, and I would like to see it done by somebody, even if it is not me." We went around the north row, and I looked into the hall as we passed because I could not help it. And they were standing in their rows in the still water, facing in, and the woman with the braid was in the 3rd row where she had been, and Sura went past her without turning her head, which was the bravest thing I saw anybody do that year. The stair behind the last pillar went down 11 turns, and the water went with us for 4 of them, and then stopped, held back in a way I did not understand, and still do not, standing at the edge of the 5th turn like a window. We stepped through it and came out dry, and the air below was hot and had the honey light thick in the walls. And there was one sound down there, which was water dripping into water somewhere out of sight. "That is the seam," said the pot, "below the last floor. That water has never touched a mouth." The last chamber was not a throne room. A great many people have drawn it since, and every one of them has drawn it wrong. It was a kitchen. It was round, with a cold hearth in the middle of it, built the way a person builds a hearth, in a horseshoe. There were shelves cut into the wall, and 11 stone jars along one of them, all empty. There was a long table with benches, and the benches were worn in the middle the way a stair is worn, by people sitting on them for a very long time. And at the far end, on the floor, with his back against the wall, there was a small old man. He was not enormous. That is the other thing everyone gets wrong. He was the size of a man, naked to the waist, his skin the color of the stone, and there were things in him. That is the only way I can say it. Under the skin of his chest and his arms there were shapes that did not belong to a human body, and that moved slightly and continuously, like sleeping animals under a blanket. His hands were enormous. His face was an old man's face, jowled and tired, and his eyes were the same ordinary eyes that Marit had, and Grell had, and every one of them has. He looked at the pot in my arms for a long time before he looked at me. Then he said, in a dry, ruined voice that had not been used in 6 days, "You skim." I nearly dropped it. "I could smell it up there," he said, "all year, every time you got one right. I have not been able to smell a finished thing since the year of the low tide. Sit down. I have not asked anybody to sit down in 90 years, and I would like to find out whether I still can. I sat down on the bench because there was nothing else sensible to do, and Nell stood behind me with her hand on my shoulder, and Sura stood in the doorway of the stair and did not sit at all. His name was Oren. He told us that himself in the first minute, the way a man puts down a heavy thing. I am going to write only what matters of that conversation, because most of it was an old man saying names. There was a famine on that coast in the year the mouths opened. Everybody says the year of the low tide, as if it were about the tide. It was 3 seasons of black rot in the barley and a fishery that went somewhere else, and it killed 1 household in 5. Oren was a fisherman with a wife and 2 boys and a mother in the house, and in the second winter of it, the ground opened in 11 places along that coast, and warm air came out of the holes, and there were animals inside. Somebody had to eat one first, he said. That is all it was.
There were men who said it was a gift, and men who said it was a trap, and every one of them stood at the mouth of that hole and did not go in. And my mother had stopped getting up. So I went in and killed a thing and cooked it on the beach in front of 200 people, and ate it in front of them, and said I would eat it for 11 days and they should watch me, and if I was still standing at the end, they should feed their children. I said nothing. Nell's hand tightened on my shoulder. I was strong on the 4th day, said Oren. Stronger on the 7th. On the 11th, I ate 4 times what I had eaten on the 1st, and told myself that was the strength wanting fuel, and told the coast it was safe, and they ate. 400 people ate that winter on my word, and they lived through the famine. And I have thought for 90 years about whether that was worth it, and never once got to the end of the thought. And then, I said. And then the hunger did not stop, he said.
Mine first, because I had eaten first and most. 400 came down after me over 11 years, because the same thing was happening to them, and they came looking for me, because it was my word that had done it. I took them in. What else was there? And when they were far enough gone to walk up the stair and eat their own families, I held them here. There is not one of them in that hall who is standing there because I chased them. They came home to me. I am not their king. That is Grell's joke, and I let him have it because it is the only joke down here. They call you the full king, I said. I am not full, said Oren. I have never been full. That is the entire thing. There is not a moment in 90 years when I have not been standing in front of a hunger the size of that hall, and I have eaten 100 years of the world, and it has never once touched the sides. And then, a year ago, a man on the hill started skimming, and it came down the stair in the air. Why did you declare against me? I said. You had Grell say it in front of witnesses, and then you sent them up my lanes for 11 weeks, and 11 people are on the wall of my church. Because I was afraid, said Oren. Of what? He was quiet for a long moment. Of being full, he said. When you have been hungry for 90 years, the hunger stops being a thing that is happening to you, and starts being the thing that you are. And I did not know what would be left of me if it stopped. And there is a worse part. If I am full, then I will be able to think about all of it. Every one of them. The 400, my wife. Right now I cannot hold any of it, because I am always about to eat. And a man who is about to eat cannot think about anything else. And it has been a mercy, and I have not wanted to give it up. I put the pot down on the floor. Then I will cook, I said, and you can decide at the end. And if you say no, I will pour it out on the stone and take my people home. That is a promise from a cook, and it is the only kind I have. He laughed. It was a terrible sound, and it was a real laugh. "Nobody has offered me anything in 90 years, he said. "They bring me things." "Cook, then." The seam was in the wall behind the hearth, a crack no wider than my hand, and the water fell out of it into a basin worn in the stone by its own falling. I filled the pot to a third. Sura gave me the bag of gray salt from the drying racks at Coldwater, and I put in what it needed and no more. I cracked the second foreleg bone of a gray wolf that had been a cook and laid the marrow in, all of it, and set the pot on the cold hearth and opened my hand. The fire that needs no air came off my palm because I had drunk a bowl of worm broth 11 hours before and had 10 hours of it in me. And I set it under the pot, and it caught, and the room went the color of a forge. "It has to simmer," said the pot. 11 hours, not 10. "I know," I said.
I did not tell you before because you would have found a reason not to come.
I know, I said.
Skim. We skimmed. It threw up a thin gray foam in the first half hour and nothing at all after that, and the liquid went clear and then clearer than clear, the way water goes in a glass so clean you cannot tell where the water starts. Nell thanked me at the 6th hour. She sat down beside me on the floor with her ruined hand in her lap and said, "I have been standing on my own legs for 11 days without thinking about them. And I do not want to say this in a room full of people, so I am saying it here. My mother went down 11 times. I am going to go down 400 and come back up every one of them. And I wanted you to hear me say it in the place where you are going to spend your fire." At the 10th hour, the fire began to go.
The flame under the pot went from white to orange and began to sit down, and there was 1 hour left. And there is a particular quality of panic that a cook has, which has nothing to do with fear of death and is entirely about the dish. Oren got up off the floor. It took him a long time. He came across his kitchen with the shapes moving under his skin, and knelt at the hearth beside me and put both of those enormous hands underneath my pot, and fire came out of them, white and steady and needing no air, because he had eaten a cinder worm in the 40th year and 11 more since. He held it there for 59 minutes without moving. At the end of it, the larder wrote, and it wrote in the room. And I know it wrote in the room because every one of us heard it, including him. And he had not heard the larder write in 90 years. The larder writes, "Water from beneath the last floor, salt from the coast carried down by living hands. The marrow of the first thing you ever cooked,
Simmered 11 hours over a fire that needs no air. Cooked by a cook whose table is empty, which has not happened before. Done correctly. Divinity. This dish gives no strength. The eater will be full. Yield 11 bowls." I filled the first bowl and held it out to him, and he did not take it. "Not first," he said. 90 years I have gone first. It is the only thing I ever actually did wrong. Bring one down." Sora was up the stair before he finished the sentence. She came back with Grell, and Grell came down the 11 turns and through the wall of water, and looked at the small old man kneeling by the hearth, and then at the bowl in my hands, and said, all 4 mouths going at once, "I have waited 91 years, and I am not going first either." He went, and he brought her down. I will not describe how the woman with the braid came down 11 turns of a stair, because it was not dignified, and because Sora has asked me not to.
What I will write is that she stood in the doorway with the stone growing out of her shoulders and her ordinary eyes going around the room, and that she smelled it, and that her whole ruined body turned toward the pot the way a plant turns. Sura took the bowl out of my hands and held it out to her sister and said her name. Marit drank it standing up, the way she had drunk my wolf broth off my hearth on the 40th night of that year. It was not violent. That is what nobody believes. She swallowed, and she stopped, and for about a minute, the only thing that happened, was that she went on standing there and did not want anything.
Then the plates of gray stone on her shoulder came loose and broke on the floor like crockery, and the long right arm shortened, and her legs unbent, and her jaw closed. All of it slowly and quietly, over perhaps 4 minutes. And at the end there was a woman of 28 standing in a stone kitchen in a filthy rag with her sister holding her up. And she said in a completely ordinary voice, "I am cold." Grell took the second bowl. All 4 of his mouths closed, one after another, the last being the one in his chest. And when he was a man again, he was a small, bald man of about 50, with a brass chain in his hand. And he sat on the floor of that kitchen and said the price of herring in the year of the low tide out loud to nobody several times. Oren took the third. He drank it kneeling because he never did get all the way up again, and he set the bowl down, and the shapes under his skin stopped moving. Then he began to weep, and he wept for a long time. And it was the worst thing I have ever sat next to, because he was not weeping about being cured. He was doing the thing he had told me he was afraid of. He was thinking about all of it at last, with a full stomach and a quiet head, 400 names deep, and nobody in that room could do a single thing to help him, and we all stayed anyway. When he could talk, he said, "Thank you." And then he said, "Do not give me another one. There are 8 left, and I am not to have any of them. Write that down." And I wrote it down. We fed the other 8 that night, to the 8 nearest the front of the hall, and then the pot was empty, and the marrow was gone, and there was no more divinity in the world until we made more. Making more took years. The middle of that work was not a story, it was a job. The salt was easy, the water was there. The fire we bought from the smelters in bellows cloth, which nobody had ever thought to use that way. The cook was me, and I never sat down again. The marrow was the hard part, and I will not soften it. To bring one of them back, we had to have the bones of one who could not be brought back. There are things down there that were never people, and things that were people so long ago that there is nothing left in the meat but the running, and the huntresses learned the difference. And I cooked what they brought me, and we fed the hall 1 bowl at a time. In the first year we did 41. That number is an accident, and I have never known what to do with it. In the 4th year the hall was empty. Not all of them came back. 19 would not come down the stair, and they are still down there, and every spring somebody goes and asks. 22 were too old inside to make a life out of it, and sat in the sun at Coldwater, and died in their own beds like people, which their families said was the whole of what they had wanted. The rest went home to towns that had put their names on a church wall 90 years before. Oren came up the stair on the 9th day. He came up on his own legs with Nell walking behind him in case, and came out of the mouth of the deep at about 4 in the afternoon into a flat gray sky with rain coming in from the west, and stood there and looked at the sea. And Ola stood at the wall with her book and did not write anything down for 11 minutes, which for her is a kind of scream. The town did not forgive him. He had eaten first and said it was safe, and 400 people had followed him down, and there were families in Coldwater that would not have his name in the house, and when he sat at the long table, half the benches emptied. And he was fed there every day of the 400 days he had left. And nobody once suggested that he should not be, and when he died in the spring, the same people who would not sit with him carried him. And if you want to know what that coast is, it is that. He peeled roots at my table for a year and a half. He was very slow and very bad at it. I have never in my life met anybody who enjoyed a job more. The pot went quiet after that, mostly. It talks less now that the writing is done. On the night we came up, I got the gray book out of the compartment in the lid and turned to the last page, where the ink had stopped in the middle of a word 11 years before. "Finish it," said the pot. So I wrote out the recipe under his unfinished word in my much worse hand, all 4 ingredients and the condition. And then, because it was the only entry the man had not been able to write for himself, I turned back to where the 41 entries ended and put in the 42nd. The man who was the gray wolf came in at the mouth at Coldwater carrying his own pot, took 11 years to stop being himself and 11 more to stop hunting. Cooked in root and deep salt on the floor of the first gallery, eaten by 2, and one of them was a girl of 11, who is the fastest thing on this coast now and does not know whose speed she is carrying, and I have decided not to tell her, and if I am wrong about that, I will be wrong for the rest of my life. Rest. He is the only one of the 400 who could not come back because I ate him on my first day, before anybody had told me anything, and there is no bringing a man back out of a bowl. The last recipe was made out of him, and it has brought back everyone else, and I have gone round that on a great many nights, and never found a shape for it that is either comfortable or false. I am 55 now.
I run a kitchen on the flat by the boat sheds at Coldwater, 40 benches, 3 fires, and a hole in the hill above it that people still go down and mostly come back up. My ankle hurts in the morning. I cannot run down the coast road. I cannot walk on the floor of the sea. I cannot hold fire in my hand, and I have no guests at my table, and never will. I still cannot taste anything, and I still cook by weight and by clock, and by the faces of the people who eat. And I still believe them and not myself, and that is the only thing I have ever been good at, and it turned out to be enough. Ola keeps the count. Nell goes down 4 times a month and comes back up 4 times a month. Sura and Marit have a boat. Ives is 74 and carries a rod with no coal in it, and every morning I put a pot of water on the fire and bring it up slow, and when the gray comes to the top, I take it off, because the whole of it, from the first evening on that stone floor to the last bowl in the king's kitchen, is only ever that. You take out the thing that would make a man never stop. You hand what is left to somebody. Then you do it again tomorrow.